Using 4th-generation virtual reality, tons of projects have popped up using what's called the full sensory projection method. The only reason this game got so popular, even though it is not trendy, is because it brings a fantasy world to life in a super realistic way. The moment he enters the virtual world, he finds himself on a massive grassy plain that stretches as far as the eye can see. Then comes the smell of the earth carried by the breeze, and with that, a surge of excitement as he stares out at the horizon. He dashes forward, shouting that his journey to build a dream nation begins. Years later, he stands high above the land, gazing down proudly at his empire, where his soldiers are getting ready to fight to the death to protect him and everything he built. He marvels at the scene, declaring how epic it is. He is King Helion, ruler of Alchemra. After tons of trial and error, his empire has become a superpower. It is finally time for the big celebration marking the 150th year since the nation's founding. Even though a real person is behind all of this, the NPCs in the game are all non-human. He gets emotional seeing how all his effort paid off. The orcs tried to pick a fight with him and his troops during the national festivities. They caused trouble just to stir something up, but they surrendered before even throwing a punch. That left Helion feeling like something was missing. He heads back to his room, counts down from 1, expecting someone to show up. Right as he finishes, the door swings open, and in walks a fox girl. She tells him that the preparations for the celebration are done and asks him to come to the platform. He nods, thanks her for letting him know, and uses player keywords to tell her to follow him. He watches her for a second, smiling to himself. That's Reeve, the fox girl. She's one of the 3 NPCs he got from the gacha during his early days in the game. She used to be a low-rank species. The second one was a low-rank demon cat, and the third was a rare elf. Now, the 3 of them are the commanders of his top 3 army corps. Together with other NPCs, the strongest among them command the 8 Grand Corps of Alchemra. He gets choked up thinking about how far they've come. He personally trained and raised them to become elite soldiers. Maybe it is the festive atmosphere, but he's feeling sentimental. He hasn't even written his speech for the celebration yet, though he figures it won't really matter what he says. Lying down to rest for a bit, he suddenly jolts as a tremor shakes the room and he falls to the ground in shock. Regaining his balance, he looks around, wondering what caused the tremor. Could it be a bug in the game? Or maybe some kind of natural disaster event? Reeve quickly shows up, asking if he's okay. He tells her he's fine and opens the player interface. Looking at his empire, he now sees a huge forest and freaks out. What happened to the old terrain? The kingdom still stands, so it is probably not a disaster. Could this be some massive magic glitch? The 3rd and 4th Corps are stationed here in the capital. He tells Reeve to return to the office right away and runs to the ball in the middle of the room to access the nearest base or commander. But the communication ball doesn't respond. He tells it to open the map. When the projection appears, he sees that there's no base anywhere. Everything outside the capital is grayed out. It is all unexplored. He's stunned. Could this be a forced transfer? That might explain it. Maybe they were sent to explore some new territory. Forced transfers are rare events, but he's never heard of a capital being transported. He starts blaming the game company, thinking their twisted devs must be behind this again. They're known for messing with players just for fun. Reeve suddenly calls out to him in distress. He turns around, confused. Even though Reeve is brave, could this be a fear-based glitch? He tells her it looks like their capital was forcefully transported. He asks her to assess the kingdom's current status. But Reeve just stares at him, stunned and unsure of what to do. He says he'll issue quick orders to each commander and tells her to contact them and gather info. She salutes him, stammering, and rushes off. He manages to get through to his commanders. He tells them they're in an emergency situation. The 1st Division should keep assisting him as usual. The 2nd needs to check on the citizens' safety. The 3rd must treat the injured and inspect the capital's barrier. The 4th should scout the nearby terrain. The 5th will help the 2nd. The 6th teams up with the 4th. The 7th checks and fixes all facilities. The 8th surveys the perimeter from the sky. He reminds them not to provoke other nations. The top priority is understanding what's going on. He sits back, waiting for reports. If this whole event ruins the celebration, he might just file a complaint. Curious what the other kings are saying, he opens the user interface, only to see no one else online. Suddenly, there's a knock at the door. He jumps, then tells them to come in. The door creaks open to reveal a terrified Reeve. Her ears drooped in fear. She reports that the entire capital is surrounded by forest. According to the 6th Division, the forest is under an illusion effect, so confirmation is difficult. Helion considers this, deciding to form a temporary investigation team with elves at the core. Reeve says she'll inform the 4th Division commander. She then gives the report from the 8th Division. They saw from the sky that the forest is a bit less dense to the north, but it is hard to see clearly from within the capital's barrier. As she goes on, Helion suddenly realizes he didn't use any player keywords just now. Yet Reeve is still responding. When she asks what a keyword is, he's stunned. She can hear him without commands. He was just thinking out loud. Reeve is confused and asks if she said something wrong. Helion is speechless. How can she understand him now? He scrambles to contact the game manager. Nothing. He tries to calm down. Reeve asks if there's anything she can do because clearly he's freaking out. She gently presses her forehead to his. That surprises Helion even more. He just stands there, frozen, reaching out to touch her face. Before, players could feel 5 senses in-game, but now he can clearly feel her breath. It doesn't feel fake. He wonders why her cheeks are so red and why she smells so sweet. He comes up with 3 possible explanations. First, maybe there was a sudden version upgrade and the game evolved into something indistinguishable from reality. Second, it could be an elaborate prank, and this is real life, with someone cosplaying as Reeve. Third, maybe it is like one of those comics where the main character gets sucked into a game world, an actual isekai transfer. Realizing that might be it, Helion shoots to his feet. Reeve gets worried and says she'll call the 3rd Division commander to heal him. He says no need and asks her to go gather more information. Reeve nods and tells him to take care before leaving. Helion exhales deeply and goes to use the emergency logout. Nothing happens. He slumps down, totally defeated, like a sad cat waiting for food. He gazes at the sky, walks around slowly, thinking about when the game first launched. He remembers how excited he felt that morning. That day marked the start of his adventure. Back then, that's all it meant. But now, it has become something much more. The online SRPG game he plays is called Tactics Chronicle. It is really different from other war games, and the heroes have 0 combat ability. All of their physical stats are either equal to or worse than real-world humans. Only the subordinates are powerful. The kings are actually the weakest. Every commander bows in front of him as Reeve announces that, by his order, they have all gathered before him. He sits on his throne and tells them to raise their heads. He calls on Balan to explain the strange things that have been happening. Balan, the 2nd Division commander, steps forward and says there haven't been any issues with security. Even though a few people were hurt, the citizens quickly regained their composure. Balan has a trait called chivalric spirit and also possesses the discipline characteristic. He's the perfect person to trust with maintaining peace in the kingdom. Helion thanks Balan for his efforts and moves on to hear from Eltina, the 3rd Division's commander. The elf woman reports that all the injured have been treated and healed by her team. While inspecting the capital's barrier, she noticed something unusual. The main road that should have stretched out from the outer gate is gone, and the entire area outside the city is completely overtaken by forest. Eltina has the special ability called Holy Spirit Order, and her traits are compassion and dignity. Since the forest seems to be cloaked in illusionary magic, Helion figures they must have been cut off from the outside world. Their current objective is to investigate what's happening and gather intel about the surrounding area as fast as they can. He tells everyone to proceed with extreme caution during their investigations. Then he asks Reeve if the 4th Division, the elite magicians, can break through the forest's illusion. Reeve explains that the 4th Division reported it would take time to understand the spell because it runs on an unknown system and unfamiliar magic. Reeve has the Brave trait and commands a small elite unit called the Guard Forces. Their job is to help the king in various fields, and she also serves as the supreme commander who oversees all 8 divisions. She tells Helion the magic could be shattered using brute force, but Helion tells her brute force is not allowed since it could expose their entire existence. Reeve says she passed the message on to the division commander and even called her a muscle brain. Helion is puzzled as to why she would say that to another commander. Reeve looks dignified as always, but her tail standing on alert tells another story. The reason he's watching his subordinates so closely now is because rebellions are part of the game. He's trying to figure out if someone might be plotting one, which could explain why things are going wrong. Rebellions happen when loyalty drops and happiness stays very low. If that happens, the characters might rise up against him. And if they do, the war would pit them against the king, who, in real life, is just a weak human. He shakes his head and tells everyone that they're free to leave if they want. Suddenly, the 6th Division commander, Camilla, speaks up. She says that if he orders them to stay quiet, they'll obey. But if he's asking her to explore the forest, there's a problem. Hellion perks up at her words. Camilla led her unit during the Cold War with neighboring countries, and they're top tier when it comes to intel gathering. Camilla apologizes for her lack of confidence. She says the 6th Division has never scouted unexplored territory, and she's not sure she can handle this mission. Hellion realizes he misjudged things and says her concerns are totally valid. He appreciates her honesty. He reminds himself that he needs to act like a real king. He then announces a new order. Balin will stay behind to maintain peace in the capital, while Reeve and Eltina will explore the unfamiliar area. To lift their spirits a bit, he assures them they'll do fine. They're much stronger now than before, and they've done this sort of thing in the past. The only difference is that this time, Balloon won't be joining them. Both Reeve and Eltina stiffen at that. He notices they seem more nervous than before, but doesn't think too much of it and dismisses them. As the 4 of them head out, Camilla sighs, her voice soft and affectionate as she talks about how elegant their king is. If only she could have spent a little more time talking to him. It has been about 3 years since she last had an audience with him. Balin tells her it is because the other commanders have stronger personalities, and only the top 3 are allowed to stay in the capital. Camilla scoffs, saying Balloon probably doesn't know because he's a guy, but Reeve's tastes are far from decent, and Eltina's are no better. Just then, Eltina appears, smiling as if she overheard Camilla. She asks what she meant by that. Camilla tries to laugh it off, saying it is no big deal, but Eltina tells her to kneel. Camilla hesitates, but Eltina repeats herself, and the tone in her voice makes it clear that something bad will happen if Camilla doesn't obey. Camilla drops to her knees. Eltina then asks what she meant when she said, "It is probably the same for me too." Camilla stammers and says she thought Eltina liked women, so that's why she said it. Eltina smiles and says that's a misunderstanding. She likes men just like any other girl does, but she also likes cuddling with cute girls. Camilla argues that there's nothing normal about that, but Eltina keeps insisting she's completely normal, and even says Hellion once muttered something similar. Then she adds that there's nothing cuter than a girl who's about to cry. Camilla yells out for Balin to get her out of this conversation, only to realize he's nowhere to be found. Balin is walking with Reeve. He asks her why she's been quiet this whole time. Reeve tells him it felt off when Hellion said those words out loud about going beyond the capital. Suddenly, the mood shifts. Eltina says she felt the same way, and Camilla agrees, clearly relieved she wasn't alone in her thoughts. Reeve quietly confesses to Eltina that she may have upset Hellion when the forced transfer happened, but he's always been a good king and will continue to be. She says all they need to do now is follow his lead. Then she exclaims that they will become his strength, the power to carve a path forward. Eltina smiles, saying it is okay to worry about him. Reeve says she just needed to get that off her chest. Meanwhile, Hellion sits deep in thought, replaying everything that's happened. He admits to himself that he messed up. He was trying to act like a king but made a ton of mistakes. Now that he's figured out what to do, he heads for the North Gate to see the situation for himself. He sees soldiers lined up, all ready to move. He thinks it ice a bit much just to send off 2 commanders, but before he can process it, his robe is being taken off and he's being dressed in travel gear. Reeve and Eltina tell him that they'll protect him with their lives. Hellion's even more confused now. Did they really think he meant he was going on the expedition too? That's not what he meant when he gave the order. He tries to remember what he said and recalls something about it being just like the last expedition, only without Balin. That must have made them think he was coming along just like last time. Trying to play it cool, he says this brings back memories and instantly hates himself for saying it. The 3 of them step forward into their next adventure. They've been making their way through the forest for an hour now, and the scenery hasn't changed at all. The forest is incredibly dense, and they still have to deal with the illusion magic too. It feels like they've completely lost their sense of direction in this thick forest. Then suddenly, the scenery shifts a little. It looks like they're finally reaching the edge of the illusion. Eltina tells him the magic seems weaker now, and that this is probably the boundary between the illusion and a normal forest. He walks forward, but Reeve suddenly tenses up, alert. She senses something heading their way. Out of nowhere, a massive beast, something like a wolf or maybe a fox, emerges and growls at them, but none of them flinch. Reeve immediately moves in front of Helion, shielding him from harm. Helion notes that the 5-meter-tall creature clearly means to attack. This is probably the first tough monster they'll have to face. Reeve quickly moves in and launches her attack, forcing the beast to turn back and flee. Helion feels a sense of pride, knowing that his assistant is strong enough to take on something like that with ease. After all, he raised her with so much care, unlike that wild wolf. Suddenly, Eltina exclaims that she senses something else coming from the northeast. Helion instantly opens his tactical window and checks the map. There are 2 white dots, meaning the entity is unknown. One of the 2 seems to be leading the other in their direction. Eltina says she can hear a faint scream from the one in front. Helion quickly tells them they need to get there right away. The 3 of them sprint ahead and spot a hooded figure running desperately through the trees. Behind her, a large black dog is chasing her, snarling, clearly hunting her down like prey. The hooded girl screams in terror as she shuts her eyes tight, thinking this is the end for her. Suddenly, Reeve appears in front of her and traps the attacker with vines. The guy instantly freaks out, yelling what the heck the vines are all about. Helion steps in and tells him they don't want to fight. They're only protecting themselves. He adds that this is the only warning he's going to give and tells the elf man to back off and not cause trouble again. The elf scoffs and shouts profanities, calling Helion a mere human and claiming he has no right to order him around. He says he's the hunter chief of Noblewood. Helion cuts him off and says he doesn't care who he is. He tells him again to leave or this whole thing is going to turn into something way bigger than he wants. The elf notices Eltina and Reeve both standing guard, waiting for Helion's signal to strike. Realizing he's outmatched, he gives up and walks away. Helion thinks to himself how close that was. He nearly got taken out by that hooded elf. The girl, who had been running for her life, walks up to Helion and thanks him for saving her from the elf. Helion says he's just glad she's not hurt. Then it hits him. He remembers how he ordered Reeve to stop like a commander in front of this girl, which could blow their cover as regular travelers. He quickly covers by telling the girl the 2 with him are just his bodyguards, even though he's really just a non-combat handyman. The girl looks at him like he's crazy, then bursts into laughter. Helion looks at her, confused why she's laughing. She apologizes and says she couldn't help it. Helion had been so tough in front of the male elf, but now he looks all awkward around her. She introduces herself as Lifa and thanks him again. Helion says it is fine. They were just protecting themselves, and she doesn't need to thank them. She bows to show her gratitude and says she has a question. She asks for his name. He pauses for a moment, smiles, then walks up to her and apologizes for not introducing himself sooner. He tells her his name is Helion. The 2 shake hands and continue walking together. Helion asks who that elf from earlier was. Lifa explains that her country is called Latestwood. It is a city-state with only 1 city and a few small settlements, but it feels like a safe haven. About 30 years ago, a half-elf founded the country. Apparently, 100 years ago, elves and humans were at war. The elves had an advantage early on with surprise attacks, but the humans eventually overwhelmed them with sheer numbers. The elves suffered one loss after another. Pushed back, they retreated into the Great Forest, and that's when the war came to a stop. She asks Helion what he thinks happened to the female elves who were captured during the 5 years leading up to the ceasefire. Suddenly, all 3 of them get serious. She continues, saying that elves are considered beautiful by human standards. Many of the captured women were taken as spoils of war and treated like possessions. After the ceasefire, most of them were returned, but many were already pregnant. Those elves were her ancestors. And even though it has only been 4 generations since then, half-elves are still not accepted by full-blooded elves. It is only natural they don't like humans either. That's where the hate for half-elves started. Helion asks how the humans reacted. She says humans treat half-elves better than they do elves. The elves never treated them kindly, but the humans who visited the forest did. Helion realizes that the elves from Noblewood are targeting the half-elves of Latestwood. Lefa agrees, they just want peace, but 3 weeks ago, Noblewood forces attacked them without warning. Nobody knows why. They just claimed they were going to govern the city the right way, using the wisdom of noble blood. Lefa doesn't believe any of it. Helion wonders if maybe they want more land to use against the humans. If they get enough territory, maybe they'd stand a chance in a war, but it still seems difficult. The strength levels haven't changed much since the past. Lefa says if they were after territory, then they would definitely try to hunt down half-elves who escaped, like her. Helion says the elves must be targeting the king or queen of Latestwood. Lefa tells him that the queen leads the country, but both she and the prince consort are missing. She's not as powerful as the elves when it comes to magic, but she was an influential figure who united everyone and founded the nation. Lefa suspects she's been captured. Helion realizes that not only has their capital fallen, but their leader is gone too. They're really on the losing side of this war. The only real way to fight back is if all the surviving half-elves regroup and form an alliance with other forces. Lefa tells them to wait for her. She wants to go inform her people about Helion and the others, otherwise they'll be shocked when they see strangers. Helion agrees to wait. Eltina notices something on the ground and says it, Issa Magic Circle. She warns they should stay on alert just in case. Lefa uses a spell to activate the circle. It opens a portal to her settlement. Helion wonders if it is some kind of summoning spell. He's never heard that chant before. Suddenly, someone steps out of the magic circle and rushes over to Lefa, asking if she's okay. The woman raises her weapon when she sees Eltina, an elf. Lefa quickly shouts to her, Wenli, to lower her weapon. She explains that these people are the travelers who saved her. After a moment of hesitation, Wenli lowers her weapon, realizing Lefa is serious. Helion thinks it is strange how someone older would take orders from someone so young. Lefa apologizes for Wenli's behavior and Helion asks her for her full name. She smiles and tells him she's Lefa of Latestwood, both as an individual and as royalty. She welcomes them to their settlement. Lefa tells them that the settlement is just a little farther ahead. Helion stammers a bit as he nods, agreeing to follow her, but he definitely notices the soldiers up in the trees keeping an eye on him. The soldiers whisper to each other, shocked that Lefa is letting strangers into their home, a human, and with an elf too. Even though Lefa said they saved her, it still seems risky. Still, they trust her and believe she must have a reason. They reach the settlement and see rows of tents and people going about their daily lives. The moment Lefa returns, the people gather around her. She introduces the three of them as her saviors and announces that anyone who disrespects them is disrespecting her too. The people stand on the sidelines, quietly watching, whispering among themselves about how one of the guests is an elf and the other is a human. Helion looks around, feeling awkward, like a panda on display at the zoo. Apparently, Lefa is the queen's eldest daughter, and next in line to rule since the current queen is missing. She's acting as interim queen for now. Helion figures that the only reason someone as important as her would be wandering alone in the forest must be because she was trying to rescue the queen. When he asks her, she nods and explains that the Noblewood elves have been capturing their people instead of killing them. That's why she believes her parents are still alive. She tried to sneak into Noblewood with an elite team to rescue them. Helion asks how she ended up alone in the forest. She says the plan failed. The enemy found them out before they could get past the city walls. They had no choice but to retreat without accomplishing anything. The rest of her team got captured while making sure she could escape. Suddenly, Wenli stands up to speak. She says Helion has been asking way too many questions and hasn't shown enough respect to Lefa. She's suspicious of whether they're really just travelers, since there's no reason for him to be so curious. Reeve and Eltina both glare at her, but before they react, Helion signals them to stand down. He tells Wenli that her concerns are valid and that it is okay to be suspicious. He says they really are travelers, but whether they're normal travelers is debatable. He explains that they came from the abyss. Everyone is shocked and starts murmuring, wondering if they might be connected to the Demon Lord. Helion says this is the first time he's heard of that and explains they were suddenly thrown into an unknown forest while exploring an old castle. They wandered for 5 days. Wenli points out they don't have any luggage, which makes her even more suspicious. Helion turns to Reeve and Eltina, and they pull out their hidden supplies to show Wenli they did in fact carry everything with them. Reeve begins tossing ingredients from her pouch into a cooking pot. The nearby people start whispering, trying to figure out who she is. They guess she might be one of the travelers Leafa talked about. Reeve names each ingredient out loud as she adds it to the pot. With just her words, she lights a fire underneath, and the stew begins to boil. People are instantly drawn in by the delicious smell. A small child walks up to Reeve, mistaking her for a dog and asking if the food's ready. Reeve tells the girl she's not a dog and that the food's almost done. She then offers the girl a taste and scoops a spoonful for her. The girl tastes the stew and immediately loves it. Reeve pours her a full bowl. She tells the girl she can have it. It was an order from Helion. The girl gratefully thanks the divine tree. Word spreads fast. More and more people start walking over to Reeve for a bowl of stew. A girl yells for everyone to come try it, claiming it is even better than the food they used to eat at the castle. Helion quietly watches the crowd. Just as he suspected, the people haven't been eating well. There's a food shortage. They clearly took in more people than the settlement can support. A shortage was inevitable. Leifa comes over and thanks Helion for the food. He replies that he only wants to help however he can. Helion then asks her about the story of the demon lord in the abyss. She confirms it and tells him that, according to the elves, the abyss was once the demon lord's home. There are a lot of legends like that. One is about a lost forest where rare beings appeared. Another is about the Forbidden Realm. The abyss is considered that forbidden land. Even without those legends, the elves would never go near the abyss. Occasionally, a demon beast would crawl out of it, an insanely strong one that could wipe out anything in a normal forest. Leifa explains that elite units were formed to hunt these beasts, but most of them failed. Helion asks what happens to the ones that are not stopped. Leifa says they go on a rampage, then return to the abyss. To the people living near it, the beasts are like natural disasters. All they can do is wait for them to leave. Helion wonders why the half-elves would build a city in such a dangerous place. He doesn't dare ask. It would sound stupid. Maybe it was because of persecution. Maybe that's why they chose to build it there. He then asks her if any other race ever comes near the abyss on purpose. She says adventurers do. Helion asks more about them. Leifa explains that the abyss has rare materials, so adventurers go there for treasure. Even high-ranking ones show up. They hunt demon beasts on purpose. Since the beasts are loaded with magic power, adventurers use them to craft special items. Helion wonders if a lot of adventurers come to Latestwood. The elf says she doesn't really get why they would, but they do trade valuable currency. Helion thinks using only one form of money could slow economic growth. He didn't see any adventurers around, though. Leifa tells him a demon horde attacked a nearby city about a month ago. They got an emergency call and went to help. Then, 3 weeks ago, Noblewood launched their attack. It happened right after the adventurers left. Just their luck. Helion asks about the border city. Leifa says it eyes a human frontline city built right at the edge of human and demon territory. They call it the Shield of Humanity. Helion reflects on this. He figured there was a story like this coming. Demons also exist in Tactics Chronicle. Even Camilla, the 6th Division commander, is basically a kind of demon, but he's never heard of a demon territory. Helion wants to ask more, but his head's already overloaded with everything he's learned so far. Reeve glances over at Helion as he sips from his cup. The people really enjoyed the food. He notices a few kids nearby who look a bit different. He asks the elf if there were kids. She explains that they're small because they're born from halflings. There are lots of different species here. Many of them are half-species too. But Helion's surprised to see dwarves among them. Dwarves usually don't like elves. He asks if the dwarves also hate half-elves. Leifa tells him that many different races helped build Latestwood. They were a group of weak people with no one else to rely on. That's why they stuck together and worked side by side. Leifa says they created this country through cooperation. Helion compliments the place. Leifa calls it her pride and joy. From then on, while Reeve continued serving food, Helion kept talking to Lifa. He started worrying she might ask to borrow Reeve and Eltina. But to his relief, she didn't bring it up. Helion and Lifa kept chatting about little things, favorite foods, colors, hobbies, and stories from when she was young. Helion starts to admire her strength. She's still smiling, despite everything. He wonders if he'd be able to keep going like that, if he were in her shoes. Lifa goes off to help Reeve with cleanup. Meanwhile, Helion opens the chat window to message the 2nd Division commander, Balin. He didn't think communication would work beyond the abyss. No one else could see the window. It just looked like Helion was staring at the sky. Helion sends a message saying he made contact with locals and asks how things are going. The people seem satisfied, but just then, a cup falls, and everyone's attention shifts. Helion starts sweating. Lifa begins to ask something, but he knows he can't tell her the truth. In the game, rebellions happen when the people's happiness stays really low and their loyalty drops too far. Helion glances back up at the window. A rebellion has already started. The commander, Gardy, is fighting off the enemy. He mocks how weak they are. He's just out here trying to entertain himself while waiting for the supreme leader to arrive. Helion suddenly decides to leave and help with the rebellion. Reeve immediately leaps up and grabs him, carrying him through the air. She apologizes for carrying him like this, but says it is the fastest way to get there. While they're in flight, Helion gets a message. The message says he needs to defend the throne at all costs and make sure no one touches it. If the rebels reach the throne, the kingdom's morale and happiness will collapse. Then he won't be able to use the king's abilities or even the function window. That would be a fatal blow. The rebellion is happening in the capital. If the rebels reach the throne and meet all the conditions, the revolution will succeed. That would mean the end of the kingdom. Helion's heart races. If the revolution works, it is game over. The kingdom would fall into ruin. The ruling player's data would be wiped. Helion starts panicking. What would happen to him? Would he die too? Even if this is a dream, he wants to be sure. A huge battle has broken out between the soldiers. The 5th Division commander, Gardy Bergelmir, is tearing through the enemies. He wipes out the weak ones quickly and mocks them while doing it. Gardy is unbothered by the lack of challenge. He wants a real fight. As Helion and Reeve approach the castle, he asks Eltina if she hears any fighting inside. Eltina tells him the castle itself is still safe. Right now, the fighting is limited to the bazaar area. Helion orders Reeve to take them straight to the castle. Helion and Reeve drop into the castle. He tells her they're heading to the throne room. The soldiers there shout that the king has arrived. Helion immediately asks Balin for a status update. He wants to know if anyone touched the throne. Balin assures him that no one has gotten past their defenses. Helion starts thinking, who could the traitor be? He had suspected the 5th Division commander before, but if Balloon were a rebel, he would have already claimed the throne. The same goes for Reeve and Eltina. They're definitely on his side. He starts mentally going through the other commanders. Some of them are known for being arrogant or selfish. One even has a chaos-type nature. Eltina, on the other hand, has a harmony nature. She usually settles arguments between her subordinates. But someone with chaos in their nature makes choices without caring about others. Among the 8 commanders, one of them even has an evil tendency. Right now, Balin is managing both his 5th unit and part of the 6th, all on his own. The rest of the commanders are following Helion's orders as well, so he's left confused. Who triggered the rebellion? Balin then explains, it is the ogre faction. The same ogres who tried to fight during the nation's celebration but surrendered too quickly. In the current battle, Camilla complains about Gardy using her troops to destroy everything around them. Gardy brushes it off, saying that now the rebels won't dare fight again. Then, someone new steps onto the battlefield. Helion lets out a long sigh as he looks over the situation. Balin notices and asks if something's wrong. Helion just says he's a little tired. In his mind, he thinks he's just stressing himself out too much. Earlier, when Reeve was carrying him, he held on to her tightly, and that probably wore him out even more. Balin looks over at Reeve, who actually seems happy. He asks her why she looks that way. She yells back at him, saying a rebellion just happened. How could she possibly be happy? What would make him even think that? Balin tells Helion the rebellion has ended. He suggests checking out the city. Helion had planned to raise the ogre's loyalty by throwing a festival, but now it has been cancelled. The king was gone when people needed him most. That's the kind of thing that triggers rebellion. The ogres, who are not exactly known for their intellect, were bound to rise up eventually. Helion stares at the aftermath. He thinks about the horrible scene in front of him, all those ogres wiped out. The violence should have been toned down, but it is just too real. It is too much. Helion goes to meet Gardy. Gardy tells him the rebels have been taken care of. Helion praises him for a job well done. Gardy tries to stay humble and says part of this is his fault too, since he let the rebellion happen. He says he's ready for any punishment, but Helion disagrees. Gardy protected the kingdom. Helion asks him what happened to the leader of the rebels. Gardy points to the floor. Helion walks over to see the defeated leader. It is a terrible sight to look at. Still, a small part of him had wanted this outcome. Reeve walks up to Gardy. She tells him he's not addressing King Helion properly. Gardy replies that Helion gave him permission to speak that way. He then asks why she's only bringing it up now. Reeve tells him there's a time and place for that kind of talk. He should maintain proper respect. Gardy nods and tells Helion he'll take his leave. Reeve tries to stop him. Eltina steps in, showing her harmony trait. She tells both of them not to fight. Helion also yells at them to stop. Just then, the ogre leader springs back to life. He lunges straight at Helion, who's caught off guard. Reeve rushes toward him, trying to protect him. In Tactics Chronicle, the king is the weakest unit by design. No one can be allowed to land a hit on him at close range. If they do, it is over. Helion had already lost the moment he let himself be caught off guard. A million thoughts race through Helion's head. He's sure this is the end. He doesn't want it to be the end, but the ogre strikes him hard in the head before Reeve can stop it. Helion gets flung across the room. Everyone stares in shock. Reeve's eyes fill with tears as she sees what's just happened. And so, the king is no more. The weakest king, Helion, was betrayed by his own people. And this is how it all ends. It felt like a dream. At least, that's what Helion told himself. The enemy was approaching in massive numbers, with many different races joining forces to overthrow the king. Meanwhile, the king barely had any pieces left. Only 3 pieces remained on the board. 2 of them were already broken. The last one was a beautifully carved wolf piece. There was no way to win. Helion always thought of Tactics Chronicle as a dream world. That's why he chased ideals, raised his friends, and pursued romance. He had humbled the strong and helped the weak. This king had once brought peace to the land. He supported his neighbors, and the result was the end of his dream. This was truly the end. There was no way to turn the situation around. Even if the last piece was strong, it couldn't stop the endless enemies. Helion had been ready for something like this. He had destroyed nations and built up 150 years of history, all while knowing that his end would come someday. When that time came, he hoped he could face it with dignity, but when it actually happened, Helion was terrified. All he could do was scream. Helion's beautiful garden should never have been tainted with such horror. This was supposed to be a fantasy. Just a fun game. When Helion lifted his head, he saw a bloodied weapon raised over him, ready to crush his skull. And then, he woke up. Lying in his bed, startled and completely disoriented, he looked around. Reeve was sitting beside him. Helion was shocked to find himself in his room. Reeve looked equally surprised to see him awake. As Helion focused on her, Reeve's eyes filled with tears. He was finally conscious. Helion couldn't believe it had all been a dream. It felt too real. He started trying to piece everything together. He had been walking toward the place where the rebels had been stopped. Then he remembered. The ogre had attacked. He had been sure it was over. So, how was he alive now? He immediately began bombarding Reeve with questions, rapid fire. She asked him to calm down. She told him not to push himself. He had been asleep for more than half a day. Helion couldn't believe it. He didn't even remember falling asleep. Then, Helion started connecting the dots. If his memory was right, then maybe it hadn't been a dream. He asked Reeve if he was actually finished off by the ogre. She said yes. That's when Helion realized what was going on. The auto-revive feature was still working. In Tactics Chronicle, the king dying didn't mean game over. He could come back, though there were limits and penalties. In short, Helion had been taken out, and then brought back. He asked Reeve if the throne was safe, and what had happened to the Red Ogre. Reeve assures Helion that the throne is safe. The 2nd Division's elite soldiers are guarding the room. She explains that the rebels have all been wiped out. Reeve begins telling him about the rebel leader. That ogre had a unique skill. It was called Last Stand. When he was defeated, the skill activated and dealt a critical hit to the person closest to him. Guardy had already subdued him by then, which is why both Eltina and Reeve let their guard down. Helion, however, had carelessly walked up to the ogre without knowing about the skill. Reeve quickly apologizes for letting it happen. She says it was her duty to protect him, and she failed. Reeve suddenly shouts, asking what her punishment will be. Helion can't stand to see her like this. She's kneeling in front of him, head bowed low. He gently tells her to come closer and sit on the bed. Reeve listens and quietly sits down. Helion reaches out his hand. Reeve still teary-eyed from the guilt. As she moves closer, he places his hand on her head and begins patting it. He even wipes away her tears. He starts noticing things: her changing emotions, her reddening cheeks, the soft scent of her hair, the sound of her heartbeat, and the slight saltiness of her tears. He thinks to himself that he's probably a weirdo for tasting her tears. Helion reassures himself that there's no enemy army approaching. No one's trying to attack the throne. All the commanders are alive and well. The kingdom is safe. Maybe it was all just a dream. But this one isn't. Helion starts asking Reeve if there were any other issues besides the ogre attack. Reeve gets flustered and confused. He tells her to calm down first. Her answers come out inconsistent. She finally takes a deep breath and settles down a bit. Reeve tells Helion there were only minor problems, nothing that would really threaten the kingdom. Helion asks about the other commanders. Reeve says they're doing what they were ordered to do. Eltina and Guardy are handling their divisions and are concerned about Helion's condition. Helion gives a new order. He wants Guardy to take charge of public order. If another rebellion happens, Guardy is allowed to make decisions on his own. Reeve seems surprised, but agrees to follow the order. Helion explains that even though the rebellion came from Guardy's jurisdiction, no one could have predicted that the ogres would rise up. Ogres are naturally disloyal, but even so, Helion can't afford to lose any more people. Helion also instructs Eltina to repair damaged buildings and treat anyone who was hurt. He emphasizes the need for better communication. Everyone must be able to adjust to changing situations without breaking the chain of command. The weak king is finally starting to act like a real king. Helion orders Balin to restore the throne room's security to normal since the rebels have been dealt with. Just then, Helion feels hungry. Reeve says she'll send someone with food right away. In this world, there's something called role-playing. It means acting out a specific role based on your character's story. Helion realizes that since he's the king, he has to act with authority. No more brain rot. But still, Misaki Tsukasa, the man behind Helion, actually likes role-playing. He's starting to sound like a full-blown Discord mod. Helion figures it was worth learning royal etiquette because he enjoys pretending to be a king. The food gets brought in and placed on the table. He tells the person to leave. Reeve is all he needs right now. He takes a sip from his cup. It actually tastes good for once. Food never tasted like this in Tactics Chronicle. This confirms what Helion's been suspecting. This is real. Too many impossible things have happened in the past 24 hours. He still can't believe it, but he's starting to accept that this is reality. If that's true, Helion decides he needs a goal. His goal now is to return to his original world. Helion keeps thinking. He just wants to go home. He spent a lot of time on this game during his youth, but he only ever saw Tactics Chronicle as a game. That's why he wants to leave. He doesn't have enough information yet to figure out how he got here. He knows he's in another world, but he can't tell exactly what makes it different. He can still use the window system features. The tactical menu is for combat and info support. The reference menu is for shared data. The chat menu lets him talk to others. The home menu shows logs and camera footage. No one else can see these menus, only Helion can. The data sharing feature is still working too. He also remembers the revive friendly function. In the game, monsters could be brought back, but only after meeting several tough requirements. First, only people from the kingdom can be revived. Second, he must know the monster's full name. Third, they have to have been defeated within the last 24 hours. Lastly, each monster can only be revived a limited number of times. The reboot van function only allows 2 revivals. If someone's gone more than that, it is their own fault. Helion only knows a few things for sure. The kingdom is surrounded by a dangerous forest called the Abyss, and they're caught in a war between Latestwood and Noblewood. He starts feeling a bit overwhelmed. So far, he's only found 2 nearby factions, but how powerful are the other nations compared to Alchemra? He also can't ignore internal problems. A rebellion already happened once. He can't let it happen again. Helion starts planning how to prevent another one. If it does happen again, he only has a few revives. The king is no exception. Helion has 6 lives total. He's already lost 1, so now he's down to 5. Game over happens when you lose them all, and that means permanent data deletion, a real skill issue for the king. Helion finds himself wondering when the final life will be lost. Later, as he looks out the window, he talks to Reeve. He says he's going to ask something strange, and he wants her to answer it honestly. Reeve nods. Helion asks her what she thinks about weak beings. Reeve looks confused by Helion's question. He gives her an example, someone like Lifa. He asks how Reeve feels about her. Reeve answers that she thinks Lifa is strong. Helion points out that, based on combat ability, Lifa is far weaker than Reeve. Reeve agrees. She says that if they fought, she would definitely win. Even if they fought 1,000 times, the outcome would be the same. Lifa knows this too, but Reeve adds that she never treated Lifa like someone beneath her. Lifa treated them as equals. Reeve continues. When they first arrived in the village, Lifa looked totally exhausted. Still, she kept managing her people without taking a break. Even though they were caught up in a war they never wanted, her people never lost hope. Lifa played a major role in keeping everyone's spirits up. Even with her weak body, she stood tall and firm. Reeve says she admired that about her. That's why Reeve believes Lifa's people are strong. Helion thinks about what Reeve just said. Lifa had a kind of strength, one that didn't rely on power. In Tactics Chronicle, being strong meant survival. If you were weak, you were finished. Helion tells Reeve that even if that's true, she's still stronger than Lifa. He asks her to think of Lifa as someone beneath her. Reeve shakes her head. She doesn't agree. Helion gets frustrated. He wants to know why. Reeve explains that she's a citizen of Alchemra. In the beginning, she was a weak monster too. But Helion didn't abandon her. He raised her to be who she is now. Reeve says that looking down on others would be like insulting Helion himself. That's why she refuses to follow the law of the jungle. She follows the laws Helion created for Alchemra. In the game, rebellions can break out. The ogre rebellion had been dealt with quickly, but if the citizens ever saw their king as weak and unfit to rule, another rebellion could happen. The kingdom would be doomed if the commanders turned against him. Helion knows he can't live in constant doubt. If he always suspects betrayal, the kingdom will eventually collapse. After all this thinking, he finally makes a decision. Helion will trust Reeve. He'll believe in her no matter what. If she ever does betray him, then that would be his own fault. Helion gives her a new order. In 5 hours, he will hold a meeting with the commanders, excluding the ones currently occupied. He tells her to deliver this message and says he's counting on her. Reeve obeys. She's determined to make Helion proud. A true simp. Reeve heads out. Helion opens the function window. He sees that the people's happiness has dropped compared to the last time he checked. He assumes it is because of the stress from the teleportation. He figures the best way to boost morale is to identify what's stressing everyone out. Right now, he can't go back to his original world. He also can't reclaim the areas they lost. Helion thinks hard. Maybe now's the right time to give a speech to ease people's anxiety. In Tactics Chronicle, giving a speech was easy. You just picked key words and it would automatically be judged a success. But now, those key words don't seem to work. He starts getting frustrated. Helion begins doubting whether he can give a speech that will actually help without relying on the system. 5 hours later, the commanders arrive in the audience hall. The great 8 commanders of Alchemra have gathered. All the commanders bow before the king. The 1st Division commander of the Elite Guards is Leva, a fox girl. The 2nd commander of the Beast Knights is Balin, a brawny lion. The 3rd Division commander of the Holy Spirit Warriors is Eltina, an elderly elf. The 4th Division commander of the Magic Troops is Celes, another elf. The 5th Division commander of the Giants is Gardy. The 6th Division commander of the Ghosts is Camilla, the Nightmare Empress. The 7th Division commander of the Mechanics is Robin, a mixed race. The 8th Division commander of the Dragons is Nograd, the Ragnarok dragon. All of them bow before the king. He thanks them for showing up on short notice. He summoned them to talk about future plans and current political matters. The king rises from his throne and starts explaining. They're on a mysterious island where they've found an unknown type of elves and half-elves. He checked their situation. This place is completely foreign. The king made sure to look everywhere. There was no sign of this island on his map. He even checked the window for details but found nothing. The commanders stare at him, confused. What was this guy even talking about? The king says they're free to ask questions. Liev, the 1st Division commander, asks him what a map and a window are. King Hellion explains. A window is a space only he can see. The map is part of that window. It shows geographic data. The commanders stare at him in awe. Hellion wonders if they still don't know about his powers. Maybe it is better that way. They won't rebel if they don't understand. He shares that some new info came in from Latestwood, but it is not enough. The real threats nearby are still unknown. It eyes a serious issue. The commanders stay silent. Liev is thinking hard. King Hellion calls on Balin. He wants to hear what the public thinks. Balin says the people panicked when the rebellion began. Things calmed a little after order returned. As commander, he's concerned about the public's mental state. His troops are strong, but this is all new to them. He also says people won't relax until there's a lasting fix. King Hellion thinks, the monsters are power-hungry. If he shows off their strength, it might scare the citizens even more. Balin adds another issue. The housing situation is bad. Locals in the capital are fine. Festival visitors have nowhere to stay. All the inns are full, and the military camp is maxed out. King Hellion thinks of a solution. He calls Gardy. Gardy bows and apologizes. He failed to protect the king. He deserves punishment. Hellion considers it. He puts Gardy under the 2nd Division's command. Together, they'll build housing for the people. Hellion wonders if he was too harsh. Still, it is a king's duty to discipline mistakes. Gardy is stunned. This is nothing compared to the punishment he expects. He asks if the king is really okay with it. Then, Hellion punishes Liev and Eltina. Their punishment is to continue the mission and act as his personal guards. He's going to visit Latestwood again to decide their next steps. The 4 commanders bow. Liev calls out to the king. She wants to say something. King Hellion cuts her off. Latestwood is their only lead. They have to go back. He asks if Liev thinks he's wrong. She doesn't answer. Hellion then calls on Camilla. She'll join the trip too, but she won't be guarding him. She'll serve as the nation's ears. Her mission is to gather intel. She'll listen to all the rumors in Latestwood. Camilla is thrilled to finally be useful. She gets to use her talent. King Hellion tells her he's counting on her. She's the best at what she does. Camilla promises she won't let him down. Hellion notices the other commanders watching him with hopeful eyes. Camilla seems proud of herself. Hellion gets what the others are waiting for. He starts praising them one at a time. He calls on Liev. She's always been by his side. She's the nation's eyes. He hopes she keeps watch over the kingdom. Balin is the nation's claws. He can tear through enemies with ease. The future is uncertain, but Balin will step up when needed. Eltina is best at managing the nation. She is the main. Celes, a powerful mage, can crush nations with her melodies. She is the tongue. Gardy is the nation's arms. With his strength, he can break through any fortress. His power is vital to the nation. Robin is the nation's feet. He's been the greatest support. His technology and backing will be important in the days ahead. Nograd is the nation's wings. His power gave them control of the skies in battle. Hellion hopes he keeps raining fire for them. The commanders all agree. Hellion tells them to move forward. Their country needs them now more than ever. Far away, Lilifa is being held captive. Her people try to defend her, but a female enemy kicks her in the head. Hurting her will send a clear message to the others. King Hellion walks alongside Liev, Camilla, and Eltina. Camilla clings tightly to his arm. Liev tells her to back off. She's crossing the line. Camilla fires back, saying Liev just wants her to mess up. Deep down, Camilla's thrilled to be here. She's playing the part of a weak, lost maiden. Liev says that's not what she meant. Camilla tells her to zip it. King Helion puts an end to their squabbling and says they're almost there. Suddenly, Liev picks up on something. Helion asks what's wrong. Liev says she smells blood. The wind shifted. She can scent blood coming from the distant camp. King Helion orders them to hurry. They rush to the camp and see many wounded. Helion is stunned by the number of injuries. He tells Eltina to heal them all. Just then, an arrow flies at Helion. Liev grabs it in midair and gets ready to fight. Helion tries to stop her, but it is too late. An injured elf draws her bow, aiming at Helion and his group. She says they can't trick her. Another figure runs over. It is Leifa. She tells the elf, Wenli, to lower her weapon. Helion isn't the one who exposed them. Lilifa is in danger because of someone else. Helion asks what happened to Lilifa. Wenli ignores him and orders the archers to fire. Leifa takes charge. She reminds Wenli that she's the queen now. The archers follow her command and fall back. King Helion apologizes. He came at a bad time, but Eltina will heal the wounded. Leifa agrees, though she's clearly worried. Many of her people might not make it. Eltina says she can handle it. She casts a powerful healing rain. The rain falls, magically healing the wounded. Everyone starts jumping around joyfully in the rain. It is a miracle how fast they recovered. King Helion asks if anyone died. He pauses and looks down, horrified. So many had already lost their lives in the attack. All the bodies are stacked into a huge pile and set ablaze. Leifa stares at the fire, looking hopeless. People weep over their loved ones. King Helion stands next to her. The attackers gave them a demand: to bring Helion and his group by morning. In exchange, they'll release Lilifa and the rest. Helion says he understands. It is a bit late to say it, but he's not connected to the people of Noblewood. Leifa tells him the elf Helion once defeated attacked their home. He brought a massive army and left many wounded. That elf is Salowin Welt, the chief hunter of Noblewood. Salowin leads the elf warriors in battle, even though there are ranks above him. Helion asks why they'd want Eltina. It makes sense to go after him or leave, but Eltina? Leifa apologizes. She has no idea either. Helion stares at the burning pile, then at Leifa. He asks if she wants to say something. Leifa bows and begs him to rescue Lilifa and her comrades. Helion grows suspicious. He asks if she plans to capture them and hand them over. Leifa admits they're too weak to fight. Even if they tried, it wouldn't work out for her. There's more tragedy. Latestwood is no longer a nation. Its army was destroyed. They lost their queen. Saving her was their last hope. That hope died when Leifa got involved. They have nothing left. Helion and his group are neutral. They don't mistreat half-elves and they can fight off oppressors. Leifa says Helion is her last chance. Helion wants to help her, but if he does, his own people might turn on him. He can't afford to put his nation at risk. He thinks for a while. Then he asks what Leifa can offer in return for the rescue mission. He needs a reason strong enough to convince his people. Leifa offers herself. She's noble and a virgin. She'd fetch a good price, and her blood is valuable. Helion asks what will happen to Latestwood if she gives herself up. The country still needs its queen. Leifa says Lilifa will take over and do a good job. Until she's sold, Helion will have full control over her. Leifa pleads with him to save her people and bows deeply. Seeing this, all the other half-elves bow too. Helion stares at them in shock. Bowing to a random traveler isn't something a ruler should do. It makes a ruler look weak. It is a sign of surrender. Leifa shouldn't be bowing to him, but she's desperate. She truly wants to save her people. Helion is the king of Alchemra. He can't just accept something like this out of the blue. He'd be risking the lives of everyone he puts on the line. Protecting the people of Latestwood is reckless. They're already on the edge of extinction. There's not much to gain from saving them. It would be foolish to help outsiders and ignore Alchemra's own problems. Helion tells himself he can't be a foolish king. Suddenly, he remembers Liev bowing to him. She was once a lost, helpless monster, and Helion took her in. She pledged her loyalty to Alchemra. She said he saved her. She'd follow both the law of the jungle and the law of Alchemra. That memory shakes Helion. It Ish's breakthrough moment. He gives the order to leave Eltina and Camilla. They're going to help the people of Latestwood. The people have begged Alchemra for help. He won't turn his back on them. Alchemra was built by helping those in need. They can't just stand by now. Halion says there are still good spirits in Latestwood, loyal ones. In the long run, they'll help Alchemra thrive. If anyone wants to object, now's the time. All three commanders agree. They're fine with his orders. Halion turns to Leafa and tells her to lift her head, as the Queen of Latestwood. Leafa is stunned by his title. He's a powerful man. Halion apologizes and introduces himself properly. He is Halion Etta Elshanok, King of Alchemra. He warmly welcomes her people and accepts them as true allies of Alchemra. From now on, they are kin. He welcomes them to the otherworldly nation, Alchemra. The people of Alchemra are talking among themselves. The king is about to give a speech and everyone is ready to listen. Crowds begin gathering in the town square. The military is making sure things stay orderly so people cooperate. Anyone who disobeys will face the 2nd Division Army. Leafa stands on a balcony, looking over the crowd. Eltina asks what's on her mind. She says Halion didn't seem like an ordinary man from the moment they met. She was suspicious of him from the start. She's shocked that he rules such a vast kingdom. Eltina explains how it all started. In the beginning, this land had nothing, just monsters and King Halion himself. Even hunting one goblin was a struggle. They used a dagger looted from a goblin. That dagger was reforged into the great sword that the 2nd Division Commander Balun now wields. What Leafa sees today is the result of 120 years of battle and effort. The nation is now 150 years old. Alchemra is stepping into a new era. Halion walks up to a stage. Guards are stationed everywhere to keep things running smoothly. King Halion begins his speech. He thanks the people for coming. Not long ago, they were forced to relocate the capital. Every one of their bases was destroyed. Now they find themselves in an entirely new world. That's what their investigation suggests. In this world, they are truly alone. The people here now are the only ones left. They are Alchemra. They've had to adjust to this place. Their food won't last long, and their numbers have dropped sharply. They have no one else to depend on. They are completely isolated. Their power is now just 1% of what it once was. The country of Alchemra no longer exists. King Halion continues his speech. There's no reason to think Alchemra is truly gone. They rose from nothing. This nation was built on the people's struggles. Over 150 years of progress brought Alchemra to life. They endured natural disasters, wars, and crises, all of it together. The 8 divisions here today are proof of that hard work. There's no need to believe Alchemra doesn't exist anymore. Everyone listening to Halion today is Alchemra. Halion says if they agree, they should roar in response. The crowd erupts in cheers. Halion goes on. Alchemra isn't the only nation facing danger. During a walk earlier, he met the people of Latestwood. They may be weak in power, but their ideals align with Alchemra. Leafa watches Halion with admiration. He continues, Latestwood was attacked by Noblewood. Noblewood is a supremacist nation that believes only pure-blooded elves deserve to be called elves. They are deeply racist. They hate humans. They hate the king's race. They captured and harmed many people from Latestwood. Now, in exchange for Queen Lalifa, they demand Alchemra's 3rd Division commander, Eltina. King Halion refuses to obey. He will fight against those tyrants and monsters to free the people of Latestwood. He will attempt negotiations first. But if that fails, war will follow. Noblewood's power should not be underestimated. To confront them, he has handed this mission to a new beast. That beast is Alchemra. The people of Alchemra are that beast. King Halion asks where the eyes of Alchemra are. The 1st Division answers, they are the eyes. They will see everything for their great king. Halion asks where the claws of Alchemra are, the ones that defend their weak and pathetic king. The 2nd Division answers, they are the claws of Alchemra, and they will tear through enemies to protect the weak. Halion asks who is the mane of Alchemra. The 3rd Division answers, the mane represents strength on behalf of their king. Halion asks who is the tongue of Alchemra, the one that drives away evil to support their king. The 4th Division responds, they defend the king from evil magic. Halion asks where the mighty arms of Alchemra are. The 5th Division answers, They'll smash through any obstacle that dares to block their king's path. The crowd gets fired up and starts roaring again. Helion asks where the ears of Alchemra are, the ones that listen on behalf of their weak king. The 6th Division answers. They are Alchemra's ears, led by Camilla. Helion asks where the supporting feet of Alchemra are, the ones that carry their weak king forward. The 7th Division answers. Helion looks to the sky. He asks where the wings of Alchemra are. The dragons of the 8th Division soar overhead. They are the wings of Alchemra, rulers of the skies. King Helion gives his order. The army will march. They'll help their pitiful king claim victory and support their fallen allies. Leifa watches the scene unfold in awe. In Helion, she sees a man and a nation strong enough to shift the fate of this strange new world. Inside a warehouse, an elf lies in bed, wrapped in bandages. Leifa tends to her wounds and says sorry. Because of her, their nation ended up like this. Leifa tells her to stay still or her wounds will reopen. She needs to heal before she can do anything. They've really weakened her badly. They start talking about a queen. She's locked up somewhere far from them. They wonder if Helion will come save them. Leifa believes in him. He's dependable. He's helped her once before. She's sure he'll come again. Someone calls out to the elves. He tells Leifa to come out. She's been hiding long enough. Leifa says goodbye to the others. Meanwhile, Helion walks with his commander, studying a map. His speech was incredible, and everyone's on board with him, but they still don't understand Noblewood's power. Eltina gets ready. Helion checks if she's sure about this. They don't have to trade her. Eltina says she'll be fine. The enemy swore by the Divine Three not to harm her. Anyone who makes an oath on the Divine Three must keep it. If they don't, they'll be disgraced by all elves. Helion orders his commander not to attack unless he says so. The enemy meets them just outside Noblewood's walls. He mocks them and threatens to drag them to Chief Hunter Salawin. Leifa steps forward. She says she brought the travelers they asked for in exchange for Lilifa. The enemy lets them inside the walls. Helion looks around. The city is wrecked. He wonders if this even counts as a nation. The enemy elf tells them to keep moving. They're brought to a spot where another figure is waiting. That person compliments their behavior. Helion asks if he's the one handling negotiations. The man mocks him. What kind of negotiation do prisoners make? Helion explains he came willingly, sent by Latestwood. He asks why they need a high elf. Is it for magic? Depending on the answer, he might cooperate. Every battle should start with negotiation. If the people of Latestwood can be saved without bloodshed, that's ideal. The enemy laughs. He calls Helion a useless human barking out of turn. He tells Eltina to mock him too. Eltina lowers her head and says she trusts Helion to handle negotiations. The enemy calls her a powerful elf, far above himself. She could command anyone, so why obey a weak human? Eltina says she holds different beliefs when it comes to humans. The enemy lifts his hand. He says she's forgotten her place as a high elf, and he'll gladly remind her. At his signal, a dragon dives from the sky. Leifa gasps in fear. The dragon has 6 wings. It is a sylph dragon. They're all in serious trouble. Leifa yells at the enemy. How did he break the seal on the dragon? The enemy just laughs. A tainted half-elf knows about the sacred dragon? Helion asks Leifa what's going on with the dragon. Leifa drops the lore. That dragon was a gift from the ancient god to the elves. It only appears in poems. It saved the elves during a major crisis. After that, it was sealed again. The enemy cuts in. He gets straight to the point. The dragon's power requires a sacrifice. With great power comes a greater price. Only a pure-blood elf can awaken the dragon's full strength. That's why it was sealed in the first place. Noblewood needs that power. They want to take revenge on the humans who made them suffer 100 years ago. The dragon is still weak. To grow strong, it needs to eat pure-blooded elves. Helion stares at him, horrified. For the past month, the captured half-elves were being fed to the dragon. Leifa gasps. She asks where her people and parents are. The enemy says the dragon already ate them, but their mixed blood made them worthless. They weren't nourishing enough. If they feed a high elf to the dragon, it will unlock its full power. Helion panics and shouts. He demands that the enemy return Lilifa and the rest. The enemy swore an oath in the name of the Divine Three. The enemy laughs. They came for Lilifa, right? He tosses a sack at them. It lands in front of Helion. He opens it and sees what's left of Lilifa. The dragon devoured her too. The enemy keeps talking while Helion stands frozen in horror. That oath only applies to elves with the purest blood. It means nothing when made with a half-elf like Leifa. The impure don't deserve such noble promises. Until the very end, Lilifa believed they'd keep their word. That was foolish of her. Helion is shaken. He presses a button on his window. No one else can see it. Suddenly, the forest starts to shift. Helion is furious. All he sees now is red. He curses himself for thinking they could negotiate. These creatures are filth. They're not real elves. They're beneath even humans. Helion casts an isolation barrier over Noblewood. The people here are like pests, and he's about to wipe them out. Helion's army begins their advance. The enemy panics. They try to alert the chief hunter, but this is not just a battle. It is an extermination. Helion gives the order. His monstrous army, Alchemra, will wipe out every last one of these Noblewood parasites.